is an interview with Karn Kowshick, who's I would say Bombay boy, born here, and is one of the accounts shows picture of Shivaji. So you always suspect that it's something to do with much Bombay. Now we are he's here, and who is he? We'll find out. So Karan, can we start with your story?
Yeah, I would love to start at the beginning. I'm not sure if I'm a Bombay boy. I definitely don't have the Bombay attitude, but I consider myself an honorary Pahadi. I've lived in the mountains for the last ever since I could leave home. Ever since my parents were okay to let me go, and I've been away from home. But I was born in Bombay. I grew up in Pune, and Pune is quite I don't know if you've been to Pune, but Pune is a very outdoorsy city. You know, like we have a culture of outdoors. We have a culture of hiking, of rock climbing. We have a pretty famous mountaineering club in Pune. So I grew up surrounded by outdoors. I grew up with the ability to go rock climbing, go mountain biking, go hiking, go bird watching, and these were things that I think took for granted growing up. And as I grew up, I was a complete misfit in school. I didn't do well in studies. I wasn't very into organized sport. So I took to the outdoors. I started bicycling, I started hiking, spending time outdoors. And quite young, when I was 16, I started working as a trekking guide for Worldwide Fund for Nature.
Trekking guide where? I mean?
Well, it was really a naam ke vaste trekking guide. There wasn't much trekking. But I did get an opportunity to visit Spiti for the first time. I think I was 17. And I got a chance to hike in Himachal around Manali. So that was my first real exposure to the mountains, and I have to say I fell in love immediately. Although at the time I had no interest in climbing. My only interest was in going outdoors, in being in hiking, in bird watching, and just basically having a...
This time you were living in Pune?
I was living in Pune. I was still studying. I think I must have been 17 or I wasn't...
Studying what?
I studied economics, and I did a master's in mass communication. And when they say economics, people from Delhi, even Calcutta, because Rajada is sitting here, economics is considered to be this elite subject. But in Pune, if you don't get into anything else, you go into economics.
Oh.
So I studied economics, and that gave me a lot of time to be outdoors. Because I didn't really have to, I was smart enough to pass. So I didn't really have to go to college. I got to spend a lot of time outdoors. I got to travel quite a bit. When I started climbing, rock climbing, quite early in life. I was fortunate.
Where did you learn rock climbing? In Pune?
My first time...
I think your speed of speaking slightly slow.
Okay, I can do that.
Volume is fine.
Sure. I first started rock climbing in Pune. We have a pretty vibrant rock climbing culture in Pune, and when I started rock climbing, because my friends were rock climbers.
This was in which year?
Wow, I have to count back. But
approximately.
I'm 40 years old now, so if that was I was 15 or 16, so 25 years ago, more than almost 25 years ago.
1990s.
1990s.
Yes.
Yeah. In the 90s, I started rock climbing. Of course, I was never really, for me, it was nothing more than a nice way to go spend some time with friends. I had no interest in climbing anything at that time. As soon as I finished college, like my parents told me I had to get a real job. So I worked as a journalist for two and a half years, including in Bombay. And I used that opportunity also to travel. So I worked in Kashmir, I worked in Andhra Pradesh, I worked in Goa, all as quite a young person, so I had these like valuable experiences that allowed me to meet people from all over the country and meet different kinds of people with different ideologies. And I think that kind of, like who we are, where we come from, I think it does direct who we become as climbers in a sense. And I think that I'm skipping ahead quite a lot, but I think that the idea of community, of climbing, equating community has stayed with me since then, and it was definitely shaped by my earlier experiences traveling around the country. But coming back to...
All this you were traveling through World Wildlife Fund as a guide, or?
No, I found any way I could to travel. So when I was young, before I had a job, I worked with World Wildlife Fund. Then I worked for a few Pune-based adventure companies. There was one called Pugmarks, which is quite famous now. So I was one of their first instructors, we used to call ourselves back then. And when I started climbing, of course, in Pune, we have a culture of climbing pinnacles. You know, these extremely rotten pinnacles with the rock just falling everywhere, no protection anywhere. So those were my first kind of experiences with climbing. When I started working, and I think like the way that our life shapes us and where we decide we want to go and not want to go. But I came to Bombay very excited to be working in Bombay in a news channel, and I hated it.
Which news channel?
I worked for CNN IBN,
Oh.
which at the time was quite a nice channel. I think journalism was still a thing back then. And although I was from Bombay, I realized, and I lived quite a nice life, you know, like I made decent money for a person my age. I partied a lot, but I did miss, there was something lacking in my life. Like I knew that I missed the mountains. So I took a year's sabbatical.
Now, but from Pune, did you climb much in the Western Ghats, Sayadris?
I did climb quite a bit in the Western Ghats and the Sayadris. I did climb most of, I mean, I wouldn't say climb as such. I did some climbing. We went to, of course, there's a regular Duke's Nose, and there's Plus Valley, and there's plenty of places where I did some climbing.
Now, I went to Kokankada or...
I never climbed Kokan. I never climbed anything that hard. Kokankada is extremely hard. But I think before I started working, I was only a climber because I liked being around climbers, and I liked being around outdoorsy people. And climbers, unlike mountaineers, rock climbers, you know, like spending time with them is basically you're just having a party. You know, like rock climbers are always pretty much high, always drunk. So I kind of enjoyed that lifestyle. I enjoyed being with these, like I came from a pretty conservative family, and to meet this kind of, you know.
So that brings us, what is your family? Your surname is how? Kowshik.
My surname is Kowshik, yeah.
So how did it come around? It's a pretty unusual name for a boy in Pune or Marathi.
My father is South Indian.
Oh, okay.
So my father is from Bangalore. My mum is from the north. Where exactly, I'm not sure. But she was born and brought up in Bombay.
Oh, okay.
But her father came from, you know, pretty close to where I live now. But she was born and brought up here. And so Kowshik is I'm not sure how it came around either, but it's basically our, you can say it's a caste, I guess, rather than anything else. It's
Basically,
yeah,
it's a kind
and
of a name.
it's just a name that my father kind of gave for the family. But he is South Indian, and my ancestry is then from all over. So I think I really didn't like living in Bombay. I didn't like the rush. I didn't like spending 2 hours in traffic every day just to get to work.
Yeah.
So I took this, what was supposed to be a 1-year sabbatical. And all I knew of that year was that I wanted to spend it in the mountains. But getting to the mountains took me a year, because I decided that I wanted to do it in public transport. I didn't want to, you know, I wanted to do the cheapest way possible, because I didn't have a job at the time. And also I'd never experienced this, like traveling through the country in like unreserved trains, you know. So I guess I wanted to challenge that idea of my own privilege as well. And I landed up somehow in Shimla, and I met a friend of mine, and he wasn't a friend until I met him. He only became a friend after we met. But we were both completely broke. So we said, now what do we do from here? How do we go? We don't have any money, but we want to go ahead. So we decided to walk to Leh. And we walked through the Spiti Valley. I ended up spending 2 or 3 weeks in the Ki Gompa. and it was almost like, like this boy from South India, like from the city, landed up in the Key Gompa, and something just clicked.
Will the key will feed you and let you stay there and all?
In those days, now if you go to Key Gompa, they have a guest house where you can stay. And, in those days, they had nothing of the sort. You would stay in one of those rooms which was cut into the rock. I'm sure you've been to Key Gompa, but you would stay in those rooms. You would eat in the kitchen with the monks. And I think they made one meal a day. For me, they would make something in the night. But I would wake up in the morning, and they would pack me a small meal, and I would go walking in the mountains. And I would walk for hours. I would come back late. I would just keep walking. And that's the first time I really felt this pull to climb on the top of something, as opposed to just walking. I really felt this pull to be on the summit of something. And I think the environment had a lot to do with it. And I remember I walked from Key Gompa. There's a trail that goes up to Tashigang and Gete. And I remember doing that walk in the first few days that I came there. And, I'd never experienced that sort of altitude before either. It was extremely difficult for me, but it changed. Something in that moment when I got to Tashigang and then walked up higher towards your Langza and all, and I saw those mountains, something changed for me. And I knew immediately at that point that I wanted to climb mountains. And again, if I can skip ahead, when I started ice climbing, the first route that I did.
How did you got introduced to ice climbing?
I'll tell you. I'll come to that. But
yeah, okay.
Yeah, what I want to say is that my desire really to climb things started in that Key monastery, and started from there. And it's interesting.
Surprisingly, when people go to monastery,
Yeah.
give up the desires.
Give up desires. I found desires. But when I started ice climbing, I just told you I used to walk from Key to Tashigang Gete. And my very first route, what I didn't realize in those days was that between Tashigang and Key there is a water supply and an open nala, and it's vertically about 60 to 70 meters, and it froze in the winter, and that actually became my first true ice climb. So that coming around to Spiti really Spiti keeps come. Spiti keeps popping up again and again in my personal history. But anyway, I moved to Leh after living in Spiti, and since I wanted to climb, I climbed Stok Kangri. Should we just wait for the sounds to start?
Right, yeah. Just don't keep on looking that side.
Okay, I just tend to, yeah. When I found myself eventually in Leh, and I decided that
From Spiti again you went walking to Leh? Yes,
walking, hitchhiking. I didn't take, I had no other way to get there. But I hitched, I stuck my finger out, got some lifts, met some people. A friend happened to be going from there on motorcycle, so I got a ride for some of the way. When I reached Leh, I immediately decided that I wanted to climb things, and that's all I wanted to do. So I climbed Stok Kangri. That was my first 6,000 meter summit. And immediately after climbing it, I started guiding it because I needed to make money. I needed to survive, so I started guiding it. I climbed Kangyatse 1 around there in an alpine attempt. And then after that, when I decided that I wanted to climb more things, when I wanted to climb harder stuff, and I was always driven to climb technical faces, to climb vertical, steep, technical faces. And I think for the next 10 years, not 10 years, but for a long time after, and even up to now, my climbing career was spectacularly unsuccessful as an alpinist. I went on expedition after expedition after expedition, and I just failed on all of them. And some of it had to do with the ethic that I chose and with the style that I chose. For instance,
Can you elaborate on that?
yeah.
Why you feel?
To give you an example, my friends, a couple of friends and I decided to climb Hanuman Tibba. And it's a peak that's climbed regularly, at least in those days before the tunnel came up, and it's now too unstable. But in those days, it used to be climbed as a like commercial trip for clients. You know, like people would come to Manali, find a local guy, and go climb Hanuman Tibba.
Not Hanuman Tibba so much, I think this
Hanuman Tibba, Shetidhar, Friendship. And when we decided to climb it, we'd heard from someone that there was a bounty of 50,000 rupees on anybody who climbs the front face. So we decided to try it. And we found ourselves just in over our heads because I'm sure you've seen the front face of Hanuman Tibba. It's vertical for almost like 2,000 meters. We found a line that goes up through the ice fall and the rock. So it almost like, it's like there was a vertical Bergschund, and we kind of found ourselves for almost like 400 or 500 meters with on vertical terrain, you know, with nowhere to stand and ice on one side, rock on one side. And we were not prepared for that level of climbing at all. I led an IMF expedition as climbing leader. Dhruv Joshi was the leader. We tried to climb Latu Dhura. Again, we failed like pretty spectacularly. We failed. I had very few like successes or summits in that time, and it began to really kind of weigh on me as a climber, and not just in the sense of when you feel like I'm going climbing, but nothing is happening. So of course you begin to question your own abilities as a climber, but it also began to I couldn't pay my own bills anymore, and I'd been doing it for 10 years, and I'd been like living off like what little scraps I got, you know, like focusing on climbing. That's when I found ice climbing. I found ice climbing when I was very much in love with this girl, and she was a professor in New York, and I decided to go visit her.
Indian or Gori?
Indian, very much Indian. Anyway, I went to visit her, and the relationship didn't work out, but the ice climbing did, you know. But I went to New York, and what I didn't know at the time is that the birth of modern ice climbing is from the state of New York.
Is it so?
A large part of it. Ice climbing, I think, was always, until the last 10 years, it was always a fringe, like it falls on the extreme edges of the climbing world, you know, because it's the kind of climbing that only crazy people really do, you know. I think the Europeans really developed the sport of ice climbing, and they kind of, you know, I've watched videos where they're talking about going up 100-meter vertical ice climbs with, you know, like terrible crampons, straight ice axes, no ice screws. You know, in those days you had those warthogs that you had to hammer in, which you can't do on a vertical climb. You can do it on low angle terrain. But I think it was in New York that Yvon Chouinard, you know, the Patagonia, and he founded the curve. He invented the curved tool, and he did it on a climb which is now called Chouinard's Gully. And I actually was lucky enough to go climb that. But anyway, coming back to the story, it wasn't working out with this girl. So I said, you know, and I always had this, I'd heard that ice climbing was a thing. And I'd already done the courses in India. I'd already, you know, done basic.
There have been courses in India to teach climbing?
No, I did not, my regular BMC, basic mountaineering course,
okay.
Advanced mountaineering course. Yeah, in the last...
Or from Uttarkashi?
I did it from Darjeeling.
Darjeeling.
Yeah, I actually did it, my first course from Uttarkashi, and I got a B grade. And I always say if I'd gotten an A grade, I might not have become a mountaineer at all. But I got a B grade, and I felt like this kind of, you know, like internal hurt. Why did I get a B grade? So I went back to HMI and I did it. I got an A grade, and in those days, if you did decently enough, they would tell you to come back immediately. for the next course. Now it's impossible to get a seat, but in those days you could do courses almost back to back, which is what I did. And so I had done some ice climbing, but it was all climbing on glacier ice, which all of us here have done a significant amount of. But what I found was that climbing glacier ice, which may be thousands or maybe even more years old, is completely different from climbing ice that's frozen last night. It's frozen over the night, and in the morning you're climbing it.
I mean, what would be the difference if you can
I think the consistency of the ice, the texture of the ice is it's different in the sense of when you sink your tool into the glacier, it sinks. In most cases the tool will go in, but in ice, in waterfall ice, most often it shatters. Because it's so hard. Glacier ice, the top layers are often quite soft. So
glacier ice, there's a green ice.
Green.
You see Siachen Glacier, very old. Is it comparable to this or not?
I think it's more comparable to, sometimes we find this very old black ice. I think it's closer in a sense to that because of the hardness. So if you don't learn how to hit it well, the ice is going to shatter. It's going to break in these dinner plates that we call them. You hit your tool and like a whole dinner plate of it just falls in your face, which is difficult because you still have to, it's breaking above you. So there's this strange fear of, am I breaking this climb and under it? Like, will this whole thing come down on me? Also, water ice is typically far steeper than glacier ice. Because if you imagine a waterfall falling down, it'll form as a vertical pillar. As opposed to glacier ice, where I don't think I've ever, in the last like 15 or 18 years, very rarely on a glacier have I found it to be sustained vertical for 50, 80, 100 meters. You might fall small pitches, but rarely is it, because of the way it forms, it doesn't form in that way. So I think...
Time है ना अभी half an hour हो गया
25 मिनट हुआ है
Oh shit!
Anyway, you keep
I should talk a little fast.
No,
Continue.
take slowly. Plenty of time.
So coming back to how I first started ice climbing, it wasn't, I was in New York City. I didn't like it. I'd come to visit this girl and it wasn't working out. So I went to the internet and I searched for an ice climbing guide, and it was winter. And I found a guy called Ian Ostier, who in New York has put up almost 200 ice routes. And he was a very interesting guy. He was
But New York City has so many.
not New York City, the New York
state.
state,
Oh, alright.
the state. So you have to leave the city and travel for like 8 or 9 hours. It's a very big state, and I didn't know that. It goes all the way up to like the Canadian border at some point. And he took me ice climbing. And I remember he charged me, he said, I'll charge you $200 a day. I said, man, I can't really afford that. And he said, listen, if you're a climber and a guide yourself, then you shouldn't argue with me on the rate. I said, okay, theek hai. It's a once in a lifetime experience. I'll pay you this money. And I hired him for 2 days. And in the 2 days that we were there, he took me on some of the hardest ice climbs in New York State. And of course, he led everything. I followed behind him. He gave me access to all of his equipment. He said, try everything out. And at the end of the 2 days, he also didn't charge me, because he enjoyed, which I found is rare for the Americans. But the moment I tried it, the first time I swung like an ice tool into like vertical ice, I was sold. Like for me, like I found that this was the perfect sport for me. So as soon as I came back to India, I called my friends Bharat Bhushan and Prerna Dangi. And I said, hey man, like I did this thing in the US and it's really fun. We should try it out in India. So they said both of them were, Prerna was still quite young then, so she would agree to whatever plan we threw at her. But Bharat was also quite instantly sold. So we said, okay, where should we go? Where do we find, how can we find this ice? So we went to Spiti, which I had been to many times before, and I knew that there should be some ice frozen. I mean, in a place so cold in the winter, there should be some ice. So we went, The first year, we really couldn't climb much because we didn't have any equipment. We didn't have ice tools. Between the three of us, we had 2 pairs of boots. So one would climb, come down, give the boots and ice tools to the other. Then the other would go up.
That's the way to do it.
That's one way to start.
Yes.
So that's how we started ice climbing. And I think, like for any climber, like this idea of like why do you climb? Like why do you climb what you climb? I don't think it ever has just one answer. Like for all of us, like of course, like we climb because there's that call which we feel in our soul. We feel this call, we need to climb. But there's certainly other reasons that we must have to climb rather than just these purely internal and maybe selfish reasons. And for me, like I have more reasons why I'm a climber. One of them why I began ice climbing was because I thought that learning how to be a good ice climber would make me a better alpinist. I felt that if I could climb a vertical 100-meter pitch of ice, and if I could climb, rock 6B, which is not that hard, then I felt like there's nothing really in the mountains that would be hidden from me. I would be able to access everything, which I find to be true. Like I do find that learning how to climb ice made me a better all-around
No,
climber.
that's true, but do you think all the foreign great mountaineers are ice climbers? Not many of them who climb high peaks.
Yeah.
They are not much into ice.
I think the question is what kind of climber, when we say what kind of climber are we talking about? Certainly most climbers that climb Everest don't need to be ice or rock climbers. But, and that brings me to the other reason why me, Bharat, Prerna decided to climb. And I was talking to Anindo about this earlier as well. I've spoken to him about it many times. But when I was a young climber, when I just begun climbing, and I looked to our history, and I looked to say, okay, and I saw a beautiful peak and I wanted to read about it. Very often the information would come from you, but what did bother me, and I don't know why, but it did bother me, that I couldn't, that a large or most of these peaks had names that I couldn't even pronounce as their, Western names as the first ascensionists. And we wondered how we, and also even if there were Indian climbers on first ascensionists, the question we asked ourselves was how can we, as a new generation of climbers, I must have been in my late 20s then, how do we put our names into these history books? How do we establish a space for ourselves in these history books? And it became apparent that we couldn't do it by climbing first ascents on mountains because they'd all been done. Like most peaks, I hesitate now to make a differentiation between white climbers, Western climbers, Indian climbers. But back then, it did bother me, and I wondered how we could put our names. The kind of climbers that we began, mountaineers that we began to idolize, they were putting up hard technical routes on some of the biggest mountains in the world. So the routes that I grew up idolizing or that I grew up thinking about were never Everest, but they were always steep lines. If I looked at our mountains, like lines on like Shiva's line on Shivling, or lines on Changabang. So these are the kind of climbs that always interested me. That level of climb, what we call alpinism, really, like high-end, hard technical alpinism. When I was in the States, I went to spend more time ice climbing. I actually went to Bozeman, Montana, and got to spend some time with Conrad Anker. And what I found was that most alpinists, like Westerners, come to alpinism with a background of rock climbing, as opposed to us who come to mountaineering from a background of walking, largely. But Westerners often come from this background of hard rock climbing. And I think that to be able to climb, if you pull out a list of let's say all the POLA winners, I think most of them, of these alpinists are very good ice climbers. You know, I think Conrad is a great ice climber. I think people who climb, to be able to climb these hard, steep lines on big mountains, especially in the Himalayas, you have to be a good ice climber. It's not necessary for Everest, certainly. And I don't even think it's necessary for putting up new first ascents or new routes in the Indian Himalaya. But to put up routes on this cutting edge of what we consider to be the cutting edge of climbing, I think for that, ice climbing and rock climbing is crucial.
Absolutely.
And that's how we thought, you know, of course, and I'll preface it with saying that, of course, we wanted to just climb. Like, and over the years, that's what we did. That's what I did. I stopped grading routes. I stopped naming them. But back then, you know, we did want to put our names in the history books. And I'll be honest, that was as much a driver for us as anything else. And we realized that the only way that our generation can put our names in these history books is by putting up first ascents. I mean, the history of mountaineering is all in first ascents. And
not necessarily, but
maybe not,
yeah.
but first ascents, but we couldn't do any because they'd all been done, you know. So
still there are many. Still hopes.
Still there are, but we can do them. But we can do first ascents, new routes on technical faces in we can do on technical faces in the mountains in the Indian Himalaya, because not only do we have access, not only do we know exactly where they are because we're in the mountains all the time, but with the ability to do this, to put up hard lines, I think we'd be able to enter what I think is the modern new age of mountaineering. So that was as much, I think, a driver for us to be able to create history. And I think over time that desire waned to put your name in the history books or to, you know.
Ask you, why
yeah.
are they so obsession with history?
I think it was. I don't know why,
History would
but
develop on its
it
own.
would develop on
By
its.
your doing.
It definitely did. I think back then it was a driver. Not anymore. Like I don't like. In fact, I think that this desire to be in the history books kind of. The outcome of this was that I didn't want to be in the history books anymore at the end of it. But it did bring up the questions of ethics, the questions of naming routes, the questions of putting your name on first ascents. Because when you climb a mountain, maybe you spend 2-3 months over there and you put up a first ascent and you do have the right to name it, you know. But
name it in a very
appropriate way.
Other names will not be accepted.
Will not be, but when you climb a route, you know, not a mountain, it can be a 50-meter route, you have the right to name it whatever you want.
Yes.
And what I found interesting, you know, was that it's an interesting little anecdote, but you know, as my partners, when I began to climb in Nubra, my partners Sewang Rigzin and Sewang Namgyal. Sewang Namgyal is absolutely apolitical, but Rigzin Sewang, he too had this you know, this burning fire. I want to do something. I want to be in the history books. And you know, he would always complain. He would say, you know what, like all of these foreigners, they came here and they've climbed these mountains, and they are mountains. You know, like we should be the one to climb it. And I remember, you know, we'd climbed this route called Whiskey Shadow. And I think when Himalayan Club just did actually we climbed it with a mountaineer called Carlos Bueller, who is a very legendary mountaineer. So
Yes.
he's a friend of mine. So I invited him to India. He spent a month with us. We climbed with him in the Spiti Valley, in Nubra Valley, and one day we climbed this beautiful route. It's about 120 meters, purely vertical. It's just this like almost vertical pillar that comes down into Murgi village in Nubra, and we named it Whiskey Shadow, and we were very proud of ourselves. And you know, we're like, oh, why whiskey? Because we were drinking whiskey last night, so it's Whiskey Shadow. And then to celebrate this, you know, a day later, Sewang Namgyal is from Leh. I am from well, everywhere, but home is now Bhimtal for me. And Sewang Rigzin is from further up the valley, but not from that village. And we were sitting there and saying, hey, you know what, like, look at us now, all of these Indians, we've gone and put up this, and look how, like, how cool we are. And we had a friend of ours from Murgi village, and he turns to look at us and very slyly he says, but you guys have been talking about foreigners coming up and climbing things and putting names, but didn't you guys just do the same thing?
Yes. I was about to ask you.
So it definitely made us question, what we were,
Whether white or brown.
whether white or brown,
Yeah.
whether, and over time, I felt like that I didn't even want to name routes anymore. I didn't want to grade them. I think all of the last few routes that we climbed in Nubra, and I'll show you some pictures tomorrow, they're spectacular, beautiful routes. But we decided we wouldn't put any names on them. So we just, like the first ascent, we just gave the credit to Nubra Adventure Club, which had, because we realized that like climbing ice in these temperatures, in these conditions, we couldn't do it if we didn't have local support, We couldn't do it if the locals weren't driving us there, starting our car in the morning, bringing us food, like taking care of us. We couldn't do it, and at the same time, they began climbing too. So we actually...
You are teaching the Nubra Wala.
So we ran two, I've been part of two ice festivals. The first one was Pitidhar Ice Festival, which was started by Bharat Bhushan, Prerna Dangi and me. And after the first edition of the festival, after the second edition of the festival, I think it's gone on for 6 or 7 years now. But after the second year of the festival, I decided I didn't want to be part of that festival anymore because I wanted to explore other places. So I went to Nubra. But Prerna and Bharat carried it on, and I've been to that festival a few times. I think on the second edition of the festival, we had a team from La Sportiva, which is an American or European shoe company. But we had a couple of their athletes come and join us and climb with us.
I mean, these are basically commercial ventures.
No, it's not a commercial venture at all.
You
It's a loss-making venture. It's not a commercial venture.
don't make any money out of this.
No, nobody's ever made money out of these.
Then why are you organizing then off and on?
I think the
When you mention Americans coming,
yeah.
they won't come for free.
No, they got paid by their companies,
Oh.
and they made a film on it, which was then later. It's called Himalayan Ice, and it was released. You can watch it. It's on I think Amazon Prime in the US.
Okay.
So they came for first ascents. We called them because we realized that we see so many of these beautiful long lines. When I say line, I mean climbs. 100 meters, steep, vertical. Difficult, and we didn't know how to climb them. We'd never, like Bharat, Prerna, the locals, we'd never been watched anyone climb this. So for us, it was an exchange of kind of knowledge, of ideas. So we brought them here, and in return, they got their first ascents. And these Western climbers are driven by the need to make their sponsors feel like they've done something. So first ascents are very important for them professionally more than anything else. They need to keep doing it. But for us, we got this opportunity to have, there was a climber called Karsten Delap, who's an IFMGA mountain guide. And he's very, very good. He's not a mountaineer, but he's a climber. So he came, an American called Ari Novak, and we watched them climb. And when they came, we had a conversation with them, and we said, listen, we've invited you here. We're going to show you all of this stuff that we found. But every time you go on a first ascent, you need to have one of us with you. So that when tomorrow, it won't just be your climbs, it'll be everyone's climbs. So they came, and they really kind of opened up the doors of what is possible for us.
How many you were there? You have been mentioning 3 students. One will join every group. So how many you were?
So there were about 4 or 5 of us by that
Only
time.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
It's not developing a movement or something.
It slowly has over since then. There were more. We had a festival going on at the time. So there were about 30 or 40 climbers
And
there.
festival, who comes generally?
So
City folks or
the
mountain folks?
the
Or from which area? Who?
the Pitidhar Ice Fest. So the breakup of the fest demographically is about 60 to 70% locals. from Kaza, Spiti, and like.
And they are sponsored or what? I mean, how do you,
They're not
they
sponsored.
manage their own money?
There is no money involved.
Okay.
They just come, And over the past few years, I think Pitidhar has gotten some support in terms of gear, in terms of funding. The rest, let's say 60%, let's put that number, is locals who don't pay. The rest, about 40%, are like city people, young, between the ages of 25 and 45. We've had a few Western participants who've paid and read about it online and thought it's a nice thing to do, and they've come and paid. But what they pay covers the expense for everybody else. And at the end of it, your question was a good question. Why do you keep doing it? I think we've, not just me, but everyone who does it, I think the idea is eventually that it should pay at least salaries to people. But, and I know it's difficult to kind of, say it or believe it, but I think for Pitidhar, for my friends Bharat and Prerna definitely, because I left, their driver has always been to spread this sport with the locals, and not be these Indian foreigners, but to to share it with the locals. And they managed to do it. I think Pitidhar, as an ice fest, faced incredible challenges, because ice climbing cannot be done with bad equipment. You do need to have the latest ice tools. You do need to have the latest crampons. You need to have good ropes. You need to know what you're doing. And when I say the latest ice tools, IMF still doesn't have them. So it's not possible to get them in India. IMF doesn't have them. And they don't even have anything close to what is considered an ice climbing tool. IMF till date doesn't have technical crampons. So they only have non-tech, where the feet are like this, but we need crampons where the points are vertical. IMF still to date does not have proper ice screws. So ice screws you have to keep twisting it and putting it in. But modern ice screws have a handle. So once you put it in, you just turn the handle and it goes in, which is what in a sense makes ice climbing possible, because you can't do this when you're hanging on one hand and you're pushing. It just doesn't work. You're going to fall, so that screw is what IMF still doesn't have not even a single of those screws.
Anywhere in India, apart from IMF, anybody has this?
Yeah, I do.
But none of the institutes or
Nobody has it.
Training, teaching?
No.
In fact, there was one of the subsidiary question. How did government or anybody help you in this?
So,
IMF or any
so I'll answer on behalf of Pitidhar, which is really Prerna and Bharat, and on behalf of the Nubra Ice Fest, which I've just always been on the sidelines in a sense, but very much in the center, but on the sidelines. I don't think they've gotten any help from anybody. I think IMF has helped them out a few times by giving them harnesses and ice screws, stuff that really didn't make a difference to us because you can't use them. Petzl India has given help to both of these festivals. Petzl, I think, sponsors quite a bit. Bhushan did, yeah. But still, they're still not able to give that kind of equipment. Grivel, some companies have sponsored a little bit, but largely the challenge, it's put together by people like you and me, and I have 2 pairs of ice tools. My friend has 2 pairs of ice tools. Bharat works in the US. He's an instructor for Knowles. So he can get ice tools. He's got a couple of pairs. When the Americans came, they brought with them some extra ice tools that they gave us, some extra crampons, some extra, some helmets, but essentially what we need are ice tools, crampons, and ice screws, which didn't come from any government, it was all put together personally. In fact, when we ran the first Nubra Ice Fest, all of it ran off my personal equipment. So we had about 15 to 20 participants, and I own, somehow or the other I've acquired 4 or 5 pairs of ice tools, and and a few pairs of crampons, and the whole festival ran just on that.
Keep on exchanging.
Yeah, just keep on exchanging. I think now they have some support from, like, ever since Ladakh became a UT, they have support from the local administration, and they get some money. And since the formation, and it's interesting because this rise of ice climbing also coincides with the rise of professional, like, mountain guiding associations. So in Ladakh, you see LMGA is formed, which then went on to, for instance, do things like climb new peaks, which then can be guided. Climb trade peaks. So they climb something that they call UT Kangri. But all of this happens at the same time, because it wasn't like, when I speak, it may sound like I'm saying that me and Pitidhar went to these places and brought ice climbing, but the desire came from there. Like, if we hadn't gone, they'd have started it somehow or the other on themselves. I just happened to be there and to fill in that void which was needed at that time. But for instance, my partner Sevang Namgyal, he has been wanting to do this for years. He just never met anybody who could help him with it. And I happened to be there, and I happened to plug that role. And he went on, not just ice climbing, but I think last year, along with some Nepali mountain guides, he put up new rock routes in the Eastern Karakoram, like bolted rock routes. So I think that this desire to go out and climb, and the desire, especially in local / I'm going to say it in quotes, for indigenous people, maybe with the rise of social media and the rise of the ability to know what's going on in the world around them, I think we're going to see more and more of, like, tomorrow's climbers, Indian climbers, coming from places like this, and with the desire to go out and climb hard, cutting edge stuff. And I think that those desires to, or need to climb for money to pay your bills, or the need to put yourself in a history book, whatever your motivations are, I don't think they're mutually exclusive to that desire, which is just the pure, okay, I just want to climb something. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because I'm a mountain guide. This is what I do. I get paid to climb. And if I'm not getting paid in the summer, in the winter I'll climb for free. But if I'm not getting paid in the summer, most probably I won't climb. So because I can't afford to anymore. I need to. This is my job. So, but I don't think
You're employed by somebody, some agency, or
I work freelance for different companies.
Okay.
But I recently started my own company. It's called Alpinist Expeditions. But the companies that I used to freelance for are all my friends. So we all work in, like, a collaborative manner. And I think that when we look at tomorrow's climbers, like, a lot of them are going to come from, rather than, like, historically Indian climbers come from the cities, I think. I might be wrong on that, but a large number of us do come from the cities. And I think that that's definitely going to change in the next few years. I think we're going to see more.
Really good, because we always look upon a person from hills as a porter,
Right.
employer, something.
Yeah.
Not ever as a side who's really climbing.
And it's interesting you say that, because in the Nubra Ice Fest, most of our participants were, and they said this, they worked as porters for the Indian Army on Siachen, and they saw these army guys. They were like, they would say, that they're the ones carrying all the heavy load, and they would see these Indian Army soldiers at the, they have the higher Siachen Mountain School. I'm not sure. Siachen Battle School over there. They would see these guys ice climbing, but they would obviously never be allowed to do it. So for them, it was interesting, because it not only gave them an opportunity, but we showed them how to do it, like, better than the soldiers. Like, we taught them how to be climbers and not soldiers. So I think it really kind of flipped the narrative of what they could be in their own minds for them. And but the desire came from them. Like, this desire ki we just don't.
I mean, this is really a very
Yeah.
paradigm shift that you're thinking.
Yeah.
And the Indian mountaineering wise, this will be a completely different chapter.
It will be. It should be. I think that we need to, like, find a way to, like, give this, more. I don't know, push it in a way. To be able to.
It's really a paradigm shift and very major change.
Major change, and, like, all we need to do is break this systemic barrier of gear and equipment. If we can And I think that I remember reading an article from the Himalayan Journal, I think in the 60s, and it said the exact same thing. You know, that all you need to do is put up like stores in places that have access to the mountains and just be able to give people this equipment to go out and climb. You know, this was like the Himalayan Club suggestion back in 1964 or something, you know, which is, we've never managed. It's difficult to do. I realize it's not easy, but it can be done, you know. And for instance, like an alpine style expedition doesn't need much. Like I can outfit an alpine style expedition from my stores. It doesn't need much, but it does require like to be able to climb at a high level, at a hard technical level, the way what is considered, you know, par for the course these days in the world. You can't do it with bad equipment. Like you do need to have good, light, reliable equipment. That's important. Of course, there's other barriers and other things like that, you know.
So now back to your story.
Yeah,
again.
sorry.
So,
Back to my story.
Sorry, we also got discussing.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
But then how did you then progress further from there?
Where were we when we?
Participated in Ladakh festivals.
Right,
started
right.
Landing
Yeah.
on your own.
Yeah, so we started this Pritidhar Ice Festival. We also started the Nubra Ice Festival, and I think now, and not just us, but at the same time, other people also started festivals. So there was a private festival by some company called Foreplay or something. So they had one festival. The Ladakhis, Ladakh Mountain Guide Association, started their own festival.
They're all at different places.
They're all slightly different places.
Okay.
And it also coincided, by the way, sorry to go tangentially again, but it also coincided, by the way, with the rise of rock climbing festivals all over the country. You know, so at the same time, rock climbing festivals began to appear, and more people, young people, began to attend these festivals, and they would pay good money, you know, to go and, you know, go to these places. There's a very famous festival in Kargil. There's a festival in Delhi now, there's a festival in Himachal, there's a few festivals in Bangalore in the south. So people would pay, you know, this good money, and at the same time, like ice climbing suddenly came out of this fringe, you know, where it wasn't anymore this like crazy climbers with nothing to live for that did ice climbing. But it suddenly came into like the center, you know, because I don't know if we can like give blame or give the credit to Instagram, but ice climbing makes for great photos, you know. So suddenly every winter now, every climber's Instagram is filled with feed of ice climbing. So it became a very like popular sport to at least try once. As for me, when the Americans came, this was the third year, I think this is now like the personal kind of my personal journey as a climber. I realized that I had to do a lot, not just to climb a vertical 50 or 100 meter pitch of ice, but then to apply that to the big mountains. I realized that I needed to be a far better climber. And one of the things of ice climbing is that it's the climbing itself is not hard. It's not, but everything else around it is incredibly hard. And we say that the shortest lesson that you can learn in ice climbing is called how to take a fall, how to fall while ice climbing, and the answer is you don't, because that's all there is. So you're never supposed to fall, and the reasons when you're, you know, like let's say you've started up a climb, you've put in a screw, you've put in a second screw, and now you've reached this like position where you don't know what to do. Your last screw is like 20 feet below you, because you don't place so many screws in ice climbing, maybe even more. You know, how do you, like, it's all a mental game. Like, you have to learn how to manage this fear. So one of the things that I did is I went back to rock climbing. Because ice climbing, you can only climb 2 months a year, but you can rock climb through the year. But I set this rule for myself that I would never ever climb on a top rope. So I would never climb on a climb which somebody's put up a top rope and then I'll just tie in and go. Like, I would only climb if I could lead up from the ground with the rope below me, put in the trad gear, or if it's bolted, put in the bolts and do myself. Because I wanted to, I found myself as a climber being paralyzed by fear. Like, I would reach this point and I would be like, oh, what do I do now? I can't go up, I can't go down. I remember I'll show you this picture tomorrow. But we climbed this beautiful like curtain of ice. Like it was almost a 80-meter climb, and I reached close to the top, and I was leading, and I had two ice screws, and I was shivering, like because my last screw was almost like 15 meters below me. If I fell, I would have taken a 30-meter fall. And I was just shivering, and I had only one ice screw here, and I have an emergency ice screw on my back, which I make V-threads with. And I took out this ice screw to put it in, and I dropped it. So I'm like so far up, and I have nothing. So I took out this other screw, and that other screw it had this V-threader and everything. So like while hanging and shivering, I had to take it out, put it in. But this fear of being which strikes us when we're away from the bolt, when we're away from the protection, when we can take this fall. I wanted to learn how to manage that, because I realized that what was holding me back as a climber was not the climbing, but but the fear. So I decided I would never climb on a top rope, and I think that's been like 8 or 9 years since I made that decision.
Oh.
And I now will occasionally climb on a top rope, because I think I've managed that fear. But that went a long way in being able to make me an ice climber. Not just that, I had to do a lot of physically, I had to work on myself a lot. I had to like when we say we want to be like Western climbers, like we also have to be as fit as they are. We also have to work when we're not climbing. We have to work on our bodies as much as they do. And I started to do that. I started to like really train. I started to climb. So that's how I think I became a decent ice climber. And in the last few years, since COVID happened, because if you remember, COVID happened just after the winter.
Yeah.
And just before the winter. So in the winter, fortunately, I found myself in Nubra. So both the winters, I think most of this COVID years, these terrible COVID years, which were terrible for all of us, but for the three of us, me, Sewang, and Rigzin, we would be in Nubra. And I think between us, we put up about 30 new routes in Nubra. And I feel really proud to say that these routes are world-class routes.
Absolutely.
They're not easy. They're all incredibly hard and challenging routes. I think when we hear your
You
team
don't mind
tomorrow.
sharing with others? I mean, you say you are going to write a book or
No,
showing
I'm
to
happy
them.
to share.
Because a lot of these Western climbers are very.
But we've already put our names on them, so
You have already created the history. You
we've already
done the history.
we've already created the history, and now we want everyone else to come and climb.
Okay.
But I just lost track of
Yeah.
what I was saying. But
And in the COVID years.
yeah, in COVID.
Climbing, yes.
So Rigzin Sewang said, listen man, I'm from Nubra and there's ice and you guys have to come there. I said, okay, come on, let's go, yeah. So we went to Nubra, and it's incredibly cold in the winter there. It's like minus 27 in the day. But we were fortunate enough to, so we stayed in Panamik. And I'm sure you know, but Panamik has these hot springs. And the guest house over there is built on top of the hot springs.
Wow.
So you can be ice climbing out in the day in minus 27, but in the night you're in a t-shirt. Because it's, and they've built these like cement bathtubs which fill with sulfur water. So it was very comfortable living there. But I think at least 30 new routes we put up in Nubra. And I think they're all world-class routes. I think they're all rated Water Ice 5 and above. Water Ice 5 is the highest rating.
Ice climbing, the rating is similar like rock climbing, or it's different?
No, ice climbing,
Systems are different.
I know you're running out of time, but I'm
That's
gonna
all right.
talk for
Go
a
ahead.
few minutes on the rating as well. So ice climbing has this, we use a scale called WI. WI, which
Who
means
developed that, I mean?
this is, I guess, the Americans. But that's a good question, and I'll tell you why it's a good question. Because so WI1 is basically flat. WI2 is also a walk, where you maybe need to put the point of your ice axe in, like you're walking up a frozen river. That's WI2. WI3 is, the description for WI3 is not vertical climbing, but small bulges of about 5 to 6 feet. So you climb a little and then you're safe, you can stand. WI4 means that you need to place screws from what is called a strenuous position. So you may be like, you're not standing comfortably, you're hanging off one hand and you need to place screws. The whole climb may not be like this, but you need to place at least a few screws from this position. WI5 means that on the whole climb there is nowhere where you get a rest. It is sustained and long vertical. So ice is, while I say vertical, it's very rarely 100% vertical. It's 85, 80. Of course, in hard ice, so WI5 is the limit.
Okay.
WI6 is a WI5 with bad protection, or with like very thin ice where it's so thin that you can't place a screw in. So the climbing is still the same, but there is no protection. WI7 is an imaginary grade.
7th grade.
Yeah, it is given to
the
very hardest of climbs, which is where something puts it out of, like some factor puts it out of normal grading system. But the thing of all grading systems, like the crux of all grading systems, to understand a grading system, you must have climbed it before. So if I say to you, oh, I've climbed a 6A, you don't know what I'm talking about until you've climbed a 6A. And for you to grade something...
But you also say without climbing, you can say this is 6A?
Rarely. Yeah. I think like experienced climbers do develop that eye to be able to tell. But what is a 6B? Like if we're talking about, like I just gave you a description of ice grades. But when we talk about, and it's the same really, this is a good description, but what is a 6B? A 6B is a climb that is harder than 6A. What is a 6A? A 6A is a climb that is harder than... So you must have climbed 5C to know what is a 6A, right? And we'd never climbed ice anywhere, so we had no idea what it was. So we developed our own grading system, and we called it HWI.
HWI is what?
It stands for Himalayan water ice. And basically we started with an arbitrary number, and we said, okay, this is our first climb, this is now, and we thought about it a bit, and we said, okay, this is now HWI 5. And then every climb that we found, we either rated it below that or above it. So we were like, oh, this is a lot harder than that last climb, so it should be a 7. But this is a lot easier than that, so it should be a 3. So we developed our own grading system, and I think that grading system, while it faced some opposition from other climbers around the world.
But that world was accepting it?
The world did accept it, like Alpinist magazine.
X series they accept.
Yeah, for our climb. And in fact, climbers that come to India often now grade their climbs in HWI as opposed to water ice. Yeah. But interestingly, because now we understand what the water ice system is. So now we grade some of our climbs as water ice, WI, and not HWI. It's complicated. But the climbs that we originally graded as HWI, we still hold that grade. And the climbs that we grade now, depends if what we feel. Because water ice is a more straightforward, understandable grade, while our grade is much more subjective.
Okay.
So that's how ice is graded.
So how do you now feel the things will go ahead in India about ice climbing or your personal life?
Well, my personal life, I think,
in
climbing, not my personal life. My personal life is not that good, I'll tell you right now.
I thought you were just started buying a ticket for New York.
No, she lives in Bangalore now.
Oh, okay.
I am going to Bangalore, but to see my grandmother, not... I think personally, the last 10 years...
To develop something new? Or one more step in the history somewhere?
I'm not sure if that drives me anymore, but if you remember when I started ice climbing, I said that I wanted to I wanted to apply this to alpinism.
Yes.
And
I mean, say climb a high peak, say, full of ice.
Yeah, I think
sections
that's...
of ice, but then there are many
not just ice, but...
Karakoram, for example, who are very steep.
Not just ice, but I think in the summer, I also, the last 10 years, I climbed a lot of rock. So I trained with, I am the first Indian to be a member of the Nepal National Mountain Guide Association. I trained with American Mountain Guide Association. in understanding, because ice climbing vertically, or even rock climbing, or even hard alpinism, I think while the climbing and the movement skills are one thing, there's also the rope work skills, which is as crucial to mountaineering, and especially when you're hanging. It's different when you're able to find footing, but when you're hanging, like one mistake in the rope work means like 45 minutes lost trying to get rid of that knot which somehow found its way to the rope. So I worked on all of these things, and I feel like the next few years I want to concentrate on on mountaineering, on like routes that I've always held as beautiful, as as ones that appealed to me. So last year we attempted Nandakot, we attempted the south face, which has only been climbed once, Martin Moran.
Yes.
And we attempted Tharkot. And while we were on Tharkot, we made like a pretty half-hearted bid on Mrithuni as well. But
So you're sort of
yeah,
in between Tharkot and
yeah. So, but we made this. We tried to do this, and I think that my future personally lies in like these kind of technical climbs
on high mountains.
on high mountains.
Oh.
But I also think that not just me, I feel like I think it's a little bit depressing to say it, but I wonder how much time, like, how much of ice we have left in the world. Like I wonder how long we'll be able to climb. Maybe 10 years, 20 years, I don't know. But I think not just me, but I think this push towards like taking this ice experience and moving it to mountains, like we spoke about from local climbers. I think you're going to see more and more of that coming up. And while India does have a lot of ice in the Himalaya, I think not a lot of it is as accessible as it is in the US. Even Europe doesn't have as much ice as the US does. But the US is like, it's got like, there's like one place in the US will have like 600 climbs, as opposed to here where there's like 50 climbs. Because although there's a lot of ice in the Himalaya, it's, it's hard to get there in the winter.
Yes.
Things are, with roads coming up all over, I think access is becoming easier and easier. I think you can now take a road all the way to Milam, almost. You can take a road from...
The road is through.
No, it's not through, but it's almost through from
Almost
both
through,
sides. From both sides. So it's just to be, in the middle, it needs to be connected. These roads go to Padum now.
Yeah.
Road goes to Dharma, Panchachuli. The road, there's roads pretty much going everywhere. So I'm certain we'll find more ice to climb. But I think that what we will see now with ice climbing, because ice climbing requires that you be extremely good at what you're doing. It's not like mountaineering where you can get away with some bad rope work technique. In ice climbing you can't, because in ice climbing you can't be dropping stuff, because that's it. Like happened with me. So what you're going to see is also very skilled mountain guides coming up. Not just climbers, but you're going to see like climbers who've done this in ice, who are very comfortable on steep, like the Ladakhis. If you go to this ice fest that they have I remember until couple of years ago, they weren't very good climbers. But ever since this ice has come around, it's fascinating to watch them climb. They're fearless. They just go for it. So I think you're going to start seeing more and more like professional guides coming up. I think you're going to go see sort of a professionalization of this guiding culture, and I do hope that we start to see more of these like cutting edge climbs, which someday I feel like when I was younger I did this, and I've kind of every year I've like followed it up, is that I took a look at all of, and I know you have one, but at the Piole d'Or winners, and I found that more than 60-70% of those awards were won in India. And I was like, wait, what? Is that the correct number? Like, am I doing my maths right or wrong? But there's so many climbs in India that have won, awards.
Yes.
And I was like, wait, why haven't we won any? So I do think that we're going to see more and more climbers that are putting up climbs at that level. And that's the level that I want to be at, and I hope that it happens. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. Talking
Thank
to
you, sir.
Lots of history you already created.
Thank you.
Sir, जा रहा है history की तरफ.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
This I say this is part one.
Yeah.
When you grow up a little, climb still more, climb to high peaks, and you will be very famous. You will be running after your appointment.
Let's hope so, sir. Let's hope so. Then I'll also interview you then.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.